We are live.
Wow.
I know, just like that.
Hey guys,
Just
what's up?
like that. I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, cool.
You have an audience
Just like that.
just like that at the press of a button.
You can have a TV show or a live podcast.
Anything.
What is going on, guys? Happy Thursday.
Yes.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are, welcome back.
It's been a while.
I feel like we gotta welcome back.
Yeah. You need the welcome back. And now it's like, then it's not only a welcome back, it's like, welcome back and dive in with us.
Yes.
This is about to get real.
Go deep.
I know. I like it.
We like to go deep.
We do.
Yeah, it's been a minute. We appreciate you guys. Hopefully you have missed us as much as we miss you. But yeah, we are excited to be back on the Access Omaha podcast. We have a really cool guest today who's going to really share some awesome information, talk about herself, and go deep. We're going to go deep today, guys. So hopefully you'll stay tuned with us. Thank you so much. We have Justine Campbell, formerly of Grace University, who's coming on to share some of her story and her background and to talk to us a little bit about some of these times that we're all in today. So with that, I'll let Ryan kind of intro, talk about how he knows her, connection, and then we can go from there.
Well, so first, Justine and I, we've known each other for years, and so this is a pleasure and an honor for me, and this is literally the woman, the rock, that was in my life as we were working at Grace together.
Yes.
So that's where we made that connection. For all of you wondering, how did these guys get connected? How do they know each other? It was at Grace University, and for those of you that don't know, I started out in the teacher ed department, helping out with all of the teachers and the professors up there, and the future teachers. I know, I was the baby. And Justine and I would always find time to have conversations, and honestly, some of the best conversations that I've ever had in my life. Because this woman, you all, she is real, she is transparent, and she's one of my girls where I'm like, if you want some truth spoken into your life, she is going to be the one to do that. And so I appreciate that about her. And as we obviously get into the topic of this discussion, there was a couple things that we wanted to be clear on. So I'm going to basically kind of share that with you guys. And one is Levi and I are going to head into this series. Series. So for the first time ever, Access Omaha, we're diving into a series with Justine, speaking on our own opinions and sharing our own stories. We're not speaking on behalf of all white people. We're just two people that plan to be transparent with y'all and as possible, and the same goes for Justine. She is obviously one black person who will share her stories and personal opinions as they relate to the topics we'll be discussing, but she does not represent all black people.
Yes.
So she is simply one of many that we have asked to join us to have an ongoing conversation about how we can unite as one. And what I really like to say is to listen to learn from, to love one another through such a time as this. And so we kind of wanted to put that out there, say that first. Obviously, we're all aware of what's been happening in the news and everything going on in the past few weeks. And so we wanted to basically get together and discuss some of these tough conversations and things. But I think you guys will find it to be a huge benefit, hopefully, for you and how you can move forward through this time and how we can support one another. So obviously, I spoke on how we got connected, and we were connected through Grace University. If there's anything you want to add to that, feel free. But otherwise, I'm gonna say let's get this party started.
Let's dive in.
And let's
Absolutely.
get going. So,
yeah, I guess to maybe intro or give a little bit of backstory about yourself. Tell our guests where you're from. Are you from here originally? Where'd you grow up? Basically, what got you to where you are today? What you've done professionally or what you do professionally now, just a little bit of backstory. That way our viewers and audience can get to know you a little bit more.
Okay, thanks for that. First, I want to just say thank you for even having me here to speak, especially at such a time as this. So, like you say, it's a tough time that we're in, but I'm glad that it has brought us to this place that we're here having the conversation. So again, I appreciate this opportunity to speak about things that are passionate to my heart.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I am originally from Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
Born and raised there.
Shout out Texas.
Hey,
Okay.
Cowgirls.
Yep. Love it. Love it.
Yes, and so my mom and dad, they met when they were teenagers.
Okay.
And so I was born when she was 18 years old. They were married, and we lived for a brief moment with my grandmother there in South Dallas, and then my dad actually bought a home. So when he bought the home, we were I believe the second or third black family to move into the neighborhood. And then from there, I believe they were divorced when I was around first grade. But the positive thing is my dad always remained a part of our lives, and so they co-raised us, so I'm thankful for that, so that I can have both mom and dad. And then my mom was a single parent, so there was trials, going through that season. But we were always raised to do the schoolwork. You didn't do anything else before you did the homework and the schoolwork. And so that was always a motivation to just learn more and learn more about, my area, my community, and was observant from a very young age. And so some of that observing took me to different places, and as my eyes was open to the realities of what was going on around me, I started experiencing the things that we will be talking about today. And so I actually ended up here because I went into the military after high school, about a year after high school, as I looked around the community and just saw, not being able to go or advance the way that I wanted to. And so naive as I was.
You served in the military?
I served in the military.
She did.
Awesome.
20 years.
Oh, yeah.
I did. So
What branch of the military?
I was in the Air Force.
Okay.
So that's what off it,
Yeah,
okay.
so that's how I ended up here.
Yeah.
Or off it. But my motive for going in at the time, I did have a younger brother, and so I didn't believe that my father would be able to send my brother and I to college. That one of us would have to go, and I knew that I always loved school. I always loved education. And so I didn't tell my parents this at the time, but I sacrificed going to college. They were frustrated with it, but I sacrificed going to college because I wanted to let my brother go, because I knew I would do it. And so I ended up joining the military as I looked around and saw things different than I wanted them to be. And so I thought I was escaping the racism and all of that, and ran right into it. That's another story for later, and ran right into it. And so eventually in time I endured and made the 20 years, and outfit was actually my last student assignment.
Okay.
And so I was here. So I'm married. I have a daughter, and two daughters, Jessica and Tiffany, son-in-law, Campbell, and a granddaughter. And so I was working for that. So life has been good. I did, after the years in the military, I went back to Grace University, and that's where I received my teacher's certificate and began to teach. 8 years I taught at Mission Middle School in Bellevue, and then I taught at Grace University. I received an invitation to come back to teacher ed, and that's
awesome.
how I hooked up.
Awesome.
I'm here.
What time would this have been around, like years-wise? Obviously, like we all know, Grace time frames and
I
stuff.
moved to Omaha in 1999.
Okay.
Moved here and completed my last year. And then when I retired from that, I took a year off and then went to Grace University. And so instead of completing it in 4 years, being a mom, I wanted to finish faster. So I actually did the degree in 3 years instead of 4.
Wow. Cool.
So this is the other thing that people don't know about this woman, but like, she is driven, okay? This woman, she is driven. If she sets her mind to something, she's gonna do it, and that's probably why we get along so great.
Well, yeah, like 20 years military, retired, then, I'm gonna go back to school, complete my degree in 3 years instead of 4, then go back and start another career as a teacher.
Yes.
So loving that. Obviously, thanks for sharing a little bit about your background and stuff. And then, as we move into kind of this deeper stuff, this all kind of originated, honestly, just by us talking.
And
like
I
started
in the office.
Yep. I mean, we just literally would hang out and talk, and this will be a little sneak peek into something a little bit later, but Justine shared this story. I can remember us all being in chapel at the time. And so at Grace University, we had this time at chapel, and somebody would speak sometimes. And I remember sitting there, and like she gave this talk on the history of like Omaha. And by the end of this talk, like all of us were in tears and just sitting there, like the place was silent. I mean, you could literally drop a pin or whatever they say, like, and hear it drop. And I think it was more so of just like, I think for a lot of people, shock.
Yes.
And just like, oh my goodness, like this took place in Omaha. And she's gonna end up sharing some of those stories later, but today, we wanted to start off basically by getting to know her a little bit, but then also, even just as so I got reconnected with Justine by showing her daughter some houses, and then all this stuff that was happening in the media and in our world and in our cities, we just started talking, and then the more I thought about it and prayed about it, I'm like, man, we need to just do a podcast on this and do a series, and so that's how this kind of evolved. And so I think I want to address, obviously, what has happened, right?
Yeah.
So as we address a couple of weeks ago what took place in Minneapolis with George Floyd, I think we can all agree that it was despicable, it was sick, it was 100% wrong with what took place. And I just want to take some time right now to kind of digest this and talk about this incident for a second. Outside of literally watching someone obviously get murdered on live TV and social media, what is the most concerning thing to you, and I think we can all speak to this, but what is the one most concerning thing to you when you look deeper into this? Like what stood out to you as you are watching this unfold on social media or on television, and walk us through some of those things that you might have been thinking at the time.
Well, this may kind of sound odd, but after watching it, it was actually my youngest daughter's the one that brought it to me and showed it to me. And after watching it, I'll talk about the experience and emotions during, but after watching it made me go back in time to emotions that I felt when I stood in almost that same place when 9/11 hit, and we watched the Twin Towers fall.
Wow.
That flood of different emotions. The first, being, okay, I know this is not what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And I literally thought, okay, are you punking me? Because they're always teasing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, but the more I watched, different emotions came. So it's kind of really hard to put it all into perspective, how overwhelming it was. But it went through a spectrum of emotions, including, frustration and, anger and, the tears and how can this be happening again, and shifting that, because I had to do something with all those emotions. I had to shift to prayer, and the prayer was something like, if this is what I think it is, God, let this be the final straw. Let this be it. Don't let this be in vain. That if this is what I think is happening, let it go from here to something more. Had no idea at that time that what the something more was, but mixed feelings about it, because I'm hopeful for the first time really in a long time, and that's sad commentary. But a little hopeful, while at the same time sad that why did it take this?
Right.
Why?
I think probably a lot of people had felt or do feel that same way, where hey, this has got to be the last straw, right? And that's why we've seen the type of reaction that we have, is because people have felt those same types of feelings. And I think a lot of people shared the same emotion, as you did and we did and stuff when we watched that video. And then the outcry and the outpouring of those emotions is a lot of what we're seeing happen right now.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you guys. My wife brought it to my attention, and she's like, "You've got to watch this." And I had already been informed, like on the radio. I listened to AM radio and stuff, and they were talking about it. So I hadn't seen it, but I knew what had taken place, and I was like, I can't watch it. I literally can't watch it. And she started playing like the first parts of the video, and I was like, turn it off. I don't want to watch it. And I think the emotions that were like, going through my mind and everything was, I was angry, and honestly, I wasn't necessarily. I mean, obviously, I was angry with what was taking place and being filmed, right? But I was having this conversation with your son-in-law. I was like, you know, I was more angry with the fact that, like, how come no one around is doing anything? You know, like, there's 3 other police officers that were standing there, but then there's all these people filming it as well, and I was like, I know me, like, I know me, and I know that, like, I wouldn't have been able to stand there and just watch it happen, you know, and as we were having that conversation, he's like, well, what do you think you would have done? And I'm like, I would have made a move, like, regardless of, I know that by taking a step towards that police officer, there might have been a chance of me getting shot or pepper sprayed or whatever the case is, but I don't think I could have stood there and just watched it happen.
Yeah.
Like, as this guy's crying out and saying, I can't breathe, you know, like, and there's other people yelling and screaming saying, hey, you need to get off of him, he can't breathe, whatever, like, he's detained, whatever the case is, like, just me evaluating that situation, I was like, no way could I have, like, sat there and watched that go down.
Even someone saying something, no one even said anything.
Yeah.
Like, even someone just saying, hey, he can't breathe, this isn't right, you know, like, one of his coworkers or the other police officers, like,
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And those things too, you know, many things, you know, came to mind, even as we were looking at the hindsight of what that did and what it has caused. Had you jumped in to, you know, stop it, then maybe it would have been a totally different story, a totally different narrative that we're looking at. I remember having a conversation with someone and even was saying, okay, is that a black person, you know, that's standing there, you know, but think about it, you know, where you could say you would have done something, you know, and maybe you would have wrestled to the ground and got off and know whatever, but if I would have done something, it would have totally flipped the script, and it would have turned out to be something that it wasn't. It would no longer have been about the wrong and the injustice that was happening there on the ground. It would have been something else, and I would have been in handcuffs or shot and laying beside, you know, Floyd during that particular time. And so I think the event's sad, but I think they had to take the turn that they did to finally get to where it is. It's almost like when I picture it, in my mind, because I'm very visual, in my mind, what we may not understand is that was a fuse. If you picture a fuse in the old days, the mine days, when they had the dynamite, the TNT there, and it was ready to explode it, well, that fuse that was lit hundreds of years ago. We've been watching the fuse burning, you know, wanting to put it out and doing different things to try to put it out for years, hundreds of years. The thing is now, it has finally hit the powder keg. It has exploded, and so the things that we've been seeing all around, you know, eyes are just now opening, and so that may be some of the frustration you're hearing as well, because we're saying, what do you mean you're just now realizing? You know, where you know, my daughter had a conversation with someone and, you know, asked that question, you know, about the experience with racism, and, you know, the surprising end some is when George Floyd died. That was the first experience, or the conversations that they're now having. And so when you're seeing some of the anger, frustration that may be coming from some of the younger African Americans, even older, it's like, what do you mean you're just now seeing it? You know, what do you mean your eyes are just now been opening? We're born, my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother, we've been talking about this for years. And so I guess my thought is, you know, not being frustrated or angry when they're angry, because you're just now seeing what we've been trying to say, open your eyes and see for years.
And I think the other thing, you know, from the little bit that I did catch, you know, I think, and we kind of talked about this too, was I think the other thing that made me sick to my stomach was this casualness of it all from this officer that was on George's neck in broad daylight. While knowingly being recorded the facial expressions that he's like giving, you know, like just the hands on the hips and, you know, just like it was almost like a very evil, proud, like sense of pride of like, it's horrible to say this, but it's almost like the vision that I saw from that was like a lion on top of like its prey. And I was like, that guy is sick. Like it was just that emotion, like right there, and that anger of like,
it's like a power drunk thing.
It
seems like he's like power drunk.
And
my image is the the hunter that has finally killed his prey.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
they're finding out now, and I'm not going to get into debating on the news or about the news and all this other stuff, but I heard something this morning when I was driving that now they found out that these two knew each other apparently before.
Yes.
And he had worked, the police officer had worked on duty at a bar that George was a bouncer at. And he was the duty cop at this bar for supposedly like 17 years or some 13 years, some crazy amount of time.
History.
Yeah, so there's no way he would not know this.
Know who this guy
Yeah,
is.
at least, even if they didn't have conversations, he would at least have recognized him visually and known who this person was. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see what comes out with that, because that could add another thing where it's like, maybe there's some other intent here too, as well.
Yeah.
You
It
know?
explained it appearing
Yeah.
like it was very personal.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So Justine, I have a tough question, obviously, to ask, but when did you first experience, you know, as we look at this, now we dive into your life here a little bit, and when did you first experience racism? Like, can you share with us some stories that may be hard for some of us to fathom, but that are things that are still taking place, that might even be taking place even in our own cities or here in Omaha? Like, can you kind of share with us a little bit about that?
Well, the first that I can remember, because I remember hearing conversations or witnessing things. When you're young, you see and hear things, but you don't understand it, you know. And at that time, things were not really being explained because my parents were dealing with, you know, the issue. I was just remember hearing conversations, but I think the one that I remember personally having, I was probably in 3rd grade when I knew what it was. And I had gone to the grocery store. I grew up in Oak Cliff, was living in Oak Cliff at the time after my mother and father divorced. And my mom wanted me to go to the store and get her an RC Cola.
I remember
Good
our
stuff
scene.
right there.
59 cents,
Yep.
at least it was.
And so I went over to the store, Gold Star. I believe it's still there, but I went over to Gold Star to get an RC. And the line usually, because not many grocery stores are usually in the black neighborhoods or whatever, so you usually have this convenience store that sells, you know, everything. And so the line was backed all the way back to the end of the store. And this kind of looked like a limousine. I didn't know limousine at the time, but a huge Cadillac, black Cadillac pulled up. And this woman that I assume must have been very rich, you know, the driver stopped and she got out of the car. I noticed her dress, I noticed her attire. I knew right away she wasn't from the neighborhood, but she came in and she went to the vegetable section and picked up some collard greens. And so got the collard greens, and so I'm expecting, you know, we go to the end of the line to come in.
Yeah.
But she came straight up to the counter. And so the man in front of me, they finished ringing him up, and then she placed her greens on the counter there, and I'm next. And she places the greens there, and so I'm thinking, you know, naive, maybe she doesn't know where the line starts because she's not from here. So I'm, ma'am.
It starts out in 3rd grade. Here it is. I love it.
The line is back there. Well, she didn't make eye contact with me or whatever, and she just kind of looked down, like, you know, at my feet area, and then her eyes came up, and then she looked back at the cashier, and she moved the greens closer as if to give the indicator for the cashier to ring her up. So the cashier, white cashier, looked at her, she looked at me, and she looked at the back of the line. And then I said again, I said, ma'am, the line starts back here, you know, I'm next. She didn't acknowledge that. She pushed the greens even further. And I can't tell you where the anger came from, but somewhere deep inside, an anger rose up. And I just remembered taking my little hands and swiping the greens on the floor and saying, ma'am, the line starts back there. And I remember her just responding finally saying, well, I never, and she left out of the store. And I think the anger came from the fact of when I saw the teller getting ready to ring her up. Those combination of things sparked it.
Allow it.
And I just remember hearing, you know, the blacks behind me, and some of them were senior in years, saying, look at that little old girl, where they're saying this, and I'm not understanding the excitement that's coming from them that I stood up when many were afraid to do something.
Yeah.
I'm now worried about Mr. Ed calling my mom and telling her what I'd done and trying to figure out how much padding that I need to prepare for disrespecting elders, because we were, no matter what, was taught to respect our elders.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was attempting to do at the time. And so I walked all the way home, fearing that I'm going to get it. You know, mom's gonna get the belt, and that's it, you know.
Yep.
But when I walked in and began to figure out, because one thing you don't lie to mama, because if she find out,
Yeah.
you know, it's gonna be worse. For you.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and so I began to tell her, and it was surprising that, you know, I saw my mom's eye water up, and I didn't understand the tears at the time, but she was experiencing her child, knowing what she dealt with in life. And it's like that feeling I felt when it first happened with my child. You're wishing that you could put that talk off, you know, we call it the talk,
Yeah.
you know, that you could put that off longer, but she knew she would have to have that talk. So she listened, and I told her everything, and I apologized to my mom profusely for, you know, embarrassing her if I did or whatnot, but she hugged me and she said, it's okay, you know. So I did fully, we never really changed to talk about it or whatever, but I just remembered that was different. Something was different about mama with that incident, and I didn't get grounded.
Did they end up calling her, or did you just out tell her?
I had told her, but later she contacted
Okay.
Gold Star as well, because in that time, you know, they knew the customers
Yeah.
that came,
Yeah.
they knew you by your first name
Uh-huh.
and things like that, so she contacted, and they had that dialogue.
They're like, ooh, your little girl. They're like, she's got a backbone. She's gonna stand up. And again, like I told you guys this before. I'm like, this woman right here is like, she does not take any crap, and she stands up
that's
for
where it
what's
started,
right.
clearly.
And I think that's what started out, right? Like
Yes.
at your early young age, but
Just seeing injustices, and, you know, why isn't nobody saying anything?
Yeah.
So in the, wherever God gave me that voice
Yep.
to be able to speak, from school all the way through military to the end of working, you know,
Yeah.
I tried to bring attention to the issues that were there that no one was seeing, and the injustices,
How-
and experienced it along the way as I was speaking up.
you mentioned military. I don't even know the answer to this, but are there any stories that you can remember from like military that you're like, no, I don't want to share that, but are there any stories of
But
like,
you're asking for
I see
it.
where
You
you
know,
are.
I know. like we got the young girl and like where it started, but then as you start getting older and stuff going into that, like you know, you've shared numerous things with me and numerous stories, and so like are there certain ones that like stand out that you can go back to and say like, man, like I just, you know, like I wish it would have been different, or I would have handled it different, or I wish that other person would have handled it differently. Like, is there anything that stands out that you think molded you into who you are today?
I think it began, because there's many stories, but one that may not seem like a story, but it is, and this is the beginning. I had been discriminated against when it came to a promotion that I should have received. It was what they called the below the zone, and so you have a time period where you're going to put on your rank, but those that are excelling, you can go below the zone. You go with your peers and you meet a board, and after that board and answering different questions or whatever, then you would get the strike. Well, I had been informed 2 weeks or so in advance that I would be going to meet the board. So you do your preparations, your uniform, etc., to get that ready. And I had done all of that and preparing to go over to meet the board the next day when the colonel comes down and he says, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to go meet the board today. I can't tell you, how they hit, because I'm trying to figure out, did something happen and they're not having the board?
Yeah.
That wasn't the answer. The general at the time felt that I had not shown him enough. And later, hindsight, I would learn that, all his officers were trying to say, sir, she's doing things that
Right.
are beyond her rank
Yeah.
and, the scope of her rank. But he had stated that I had not shown him enough, and again, they would say, but you're never here.
Yeah.
Because they're always blind, and you know, we never would really see the general because his office was all the way at the other end of the hall. He had his own access where he could go in and out of the back door. So there was no reason ever to come all the way down to the administrative side of the building to interact, or for him to even know. But his colonels, you know, even his number 2 were explaining, you know, everything. I wouldn't learn until later that from others, as they called back to the base that he was originally from, the word was that he was racist. And then later I understood a call that my supervisor, who was a master sergeant at the time, he had received a call, and they wanted to know did he have any other African Americans working for him, you know. And he said yes, and then whatever, and they would tell him then, keep a close eye, when they said it was a female, because that was my other strike, female, to keep a close eye on her. But I remembered the next morning, because they released me, the chief and, you know, the colonels, they told me to go ahead and go home, because obviously I was emotionally upset, because my ambition and goal was, in my mind, I was going to be the first black female chief master sergeant of the Air Force. And I had a supervisor who was making his rank first time every time. And so I had that vision in front of me, and I knew that, you know, if I pursued it, that it's possible, you know, it's a possibility. But then now here it is, you know, that dream being shattered in a sense, because now I'm being pushed back where I cannot. And the next morning I came in, and the chief took me in his office, and he said, I need to share something with you. And this white man took me in his office, and he said, you have 3 strikes against you. And I'm like, 3 strikes, chief? I knew 2. But 3? And he said, yes, you're black, you're female, and you're in the military. And so that began a different mindset for me, because the very thing that I was running from in my neighborhood, in my communities, I ran into it in the military. And here was this chief, you know, at that time no one spoke up, you know, like we're kind of seeing some things happening today, but in his way, you know, they would let me go early on Fridays, you know, when the general wasn't there, or give me extra time, but there was nothing that you could have done to make up for that, but that was their way.
Was he saying that in like an empathetic way, where you think he was trying to level with you and tell you what was real, or was it more of like, hey, a criticism way when he pointed those things out to you?
Very empathetic, very empathetic and compassionate, because later when I would finally experience a lieutenant colonel actually threw an item and hit me with it there, and he would take me in the room and let me know.
Because these are the people that were vouching for you, saying, hey, she's cutting her teeth more than anybody else, like if anybody's getting these promotions, it should be you.
He literally, that next morning, later on, they actually did have like a mini board. I didn't know at the time, it was just to see how well I would have done. And they asked the same questions that they had asked at the board. And when I saw that man sit on the other side of that desk and the tears fall down his face or whatever, he said, we gave our strike to someone else. So we let me know that I would have, you know, it would have been my promotion, but
had it not been for that general.
Had it not been for that general. And so then preparing me, because you know, a few months later, I was bent on, I'm not staying in, you know, I am done. And so that was his road to trying to get me to re-enlist, because I said I'm not re-enlisted. And it was almost all the way up to maybe 2 days before it was time to re-enlist. I was determined not, because this is my, you know, after 3 years, this is year 4, and I was getting ready to finish it and get out. And he had that another talk with me or whatever, and he said, let me show you how to handle yourself with us, you know, many white people, while you're in here. And we went in, I'm not going to say everything or whatever, but we role played, and he showed me a few things, and I know it was nothing but God that allowed the situation to happen the very next day with the lieutenant colonel, and that was the folder incident. And I used a strategy that chief had given me, and it worked. He wasn't sure if that little girl had just told him off or what. He wasn't quite sure. But then the chief, I remember hearing him in the hall, walking him down to the other end of the hall or whatever. He said, you know, Airman Campbell, that little old thing? No, that's not what happened. And he said, yeah, I don't think so. And then later the chief came back to my office and gave me the thumbs up. He said, you did it. He said, now will you re-enlist? The military can't lose you. And I re-enlisted the next week. artillery.
Yeah.
Didn't know how much I was gonna run into,
Yeah,
and at times
absolutely.
regretted that statement, but at the end, I did not regret because of the things that I was able to do in the military.
Wow.
to try
I
to
mean,
fight.
I think it's like those stories are powerful for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the things that I'm curious of is, like, given these circumstances and these trials and things that you've gone through, like, what is the thing or the motivation or the driving factor that keeps you positive and keeps you moving forward in those times? And maybe it's, you know, what you just explained, like, hey, here's these strategies or this or that, but I mean, there's a lot of people who would use those deterrents as roadblocks, barriers, whatever you want to call them, and just pack it up, I'm out, you know, and then have more disdain for the situation than it seems like you would, because you're driving forward, you're staying positive, you're trying to educate and you know, overcome these situations. So
In the beginning, I would say my parents. A lot of conversations that I had with my dad as I got older, you know, not when I was younger, but since they were not offering some of the information at the time, I began to ask the questions. And so it's almost as if I would begin to interview my dad or to interview my grandmother and my mom, or, you know, when I seen certain things occurring or happening, you know, asking the questions. You know, mom and dad didn't have the answers or didn't want to talk about it, asking a neighbor, you know. So very early on, I became very curious because I didn't understand what is this that's going on around me and why. And so the thing that encouraged me was my dad pushing it. You can be, you know, whatever you want to be, and you can do whatever you want to do. And I saw that in his fight, because the company that I won't name, that he worked for at the time, an automotive company, I'll say that much, he was working at the time. When they began to hire on, it was not very many African Americans being hired on there. And so a period came when they was doing everything that they could to try to get blacks to leave the job. Some very ugly things. And one of the hard stories was, sorry.
No, it's okay, take your time.
My dad, who's not here anymore, and I believe this incident had a lot to do with his health beginning to fail. But as he was down painting vehicles in, you know, the hole or wherever they had him down, you have the vents, obviously, but they would plug those vents up, you know, while he was working. So he continued to work because, again, he was trying to get him to quit the job. He knew that, you know, where he had us and trying to make a life for us, he needed that job to keep paying for the house where we had lived. And so he took a lot. I don't think the whole time he was there that they ever called him by his name. You know, other names in the beginning and then Boyd later on, but those different things. But my dad stayed.
Jeez.
And even the one that really triggered it for me when I first learned the story that they told it, and he told it. He was one day at work and they had came in and they threw whatever this chemical was. They threw this chemical on him. And then they immediately took it to the washroom, you know, to try to wash it off. He should have been taken to the hospital with the chemical that they threw on him, but they just washed him off. Well, when he got off of work, he went back to work. They made him go back to work, but when he got off of work, he said when he went out and the sun hit him, he felt like someone had just taken gasoline and threw a match on it because it began to burn. And then they had to call the ambulance and take him in. But I believe that was the beginning. Fast forwarding multiple years from then, when he, you know, was, you know, dying, I didn't make it home, you know, in time. And my aunt said it was good because your dad wouldn't have wanted you to see him in this condition because obviously something began to happen with his skin, you know, over the years or whatever. She wanted me to remember it the way he was, so they didn't tell me really how sick he was. But when I went home, my aunt said, your dad told me to tell you something, and he told me to tell you the evidence is under the house. Do you know what that means? And I knew what under the house meant because my dad had taken me under the house when I was about 5 years old, and he told me never forget this place. And so I never talked about it and never told anyone about it, but I said, yes, I know what it means. And then when everyone had finished and left out of my dad's house, I asked my uncle, my dad's youngest brother, will you please go with me under the house? was like, there is an under the house. I said, yes. So I went to the closet and, we pulled the floorboards back and it went under the house. And when I went there, I saw evidence, boxes of documents and different things that he had. But the thing that hit me the most was I saw the shoes, the boots that he had on at the time. And if that chemical did what it did to those boots,
Jeez.
I can only imagine what had happened to my dad. And at the end of his time there, he stuck it out. He stuck it out for 30 years.
Where was this stuff he worked?
I'm not going to name the company at this time, but he stuck it out for the 30 years. But when they gave him his papers, they put it down as 29.9, so he wouldn't receive his pension.
Wow.
So these are the things, and I'm just one person.
Yeah.
But there are many stories
Yeah.
like that with other people, and I'm one person. But those are the stories that have been there for years. Okay, we don't know.
Man, that's the paint thing is like, I have project houses and things that I've worked on, and you get a big paint sprayer, and you go in and you can knock a couple of rooms out in a few hours, and I've tried to do that before without a mask, and then wearing like a paper mask, even just one of the ones like that you wear for COVID and stuff, and you about die just from the in 10, 15 minutes being in there. You're like, oh, I feel lightheaded. I had to get a real full on respirator.
Yeah.
Let alone just to spray a house for a couple hours. Yeah.
Right.
And he has to keep his job. So I think a lot of that drive, comes from my dad.
Wow.
So, obviously, as we talk about this, I mean, when I think about you and this drive, and we'll obviously get into this in some other series, but how do we move forward with what you just shared and what we know now with the current events and things going on? In your opinion, like what challenges do you see happening in the future, and how do we overcome this type of evil that you just described, like in our world, from happening again? And obviously, again, we've talked about this.
Yes.
This isn't going to happen overnight.
No, not at all.
Right? But I think, like you said, this has brought to light a lot of instances where it opens people's eyes and ears and awareness of, wow, like this is stuff that goes on that we don't know anything about. And
well, we knew about it.
Right. But I remember laying in bed, sharing some stories with my wife, that you had shared with me, and her getting so angry and upset, and she's like, I just don't understand. Like, I don't understand all this stuff when the George Floyd thing went down. Like, and they're sending everybody home here because of riots and stuff happening. Like, my mom calls me and she's like crying on the phone, and I'll never forget it. She's like, I just don't understand why there's so much like hate and evil in our world, and why this is going on, and I'm scared. And my mom's like crying, and I'm like, we're gonna be okay, Mom. Like, we're gonna be okay, and we're gonna get through this. But I think it's hitting a lot of people where they're just like, okay, we've brought it to light, and now what does it look like to move forward? And in your opinion, what are the challenges that you think we're going to encounter as we begin to bring this more to light, and we begin to have these conversations and dialoguing about it?
I think the challenge is going to be, and now we use black, white terms, and knowing that there are people of color that are on this side of the spectrum as well, but this is where we are right now, that the challenge is being able to listen and really hear the stories. The stories that I shared with you, there are thousands and thousands of stories that are out there, and so being willing to be uncomfortable, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it is going to be a long road. It didn't get this way overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. I think having to also, the hard part of not feeling that, white people not feeling like they have to apologize
Right.
for a whole race of people.
Right.
You can't apologize for a whole race of people and what was done, but you can be empathetic. We're not looking for sympathy.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's not what we're looking for.
Yep.
You know, but to be empathetic and to hear, you know, really hear,
Right.
you know,
Yep.
really hear the stories and not brush them off as, oh, you know, with that, like it's an isolated incident. It's not, you know. And I know many, you know, don't believe that there's systemic racism, but it absolutely is. And until we open our eyes and see it, it unfold, then it makes it difficult to do anything, you know, about it and move forward.
I think the biggest challenge is like you know, let me rephrase that. I think the best solution is, like you said, is having the conversations, right? And the biggest challenge is that most people don't have those conversations. Yes. They don't know. And I think one of the, I guess, not that there's any silver lining to what happened to George, but the one thing that now we can all use to move forward is recognize that, hey, there's an entire group of people in this country that feel a certain way about a certain thing. What is the reason for that? Obviously there's some issue here, right?
Yep.
Obviously, you know, we were talking about this the other day. There, obviously, if a certain group, I don't want to say it like a group, right? Because for me, my whole thing is like, we're all humans, we're all citizens of the United States. You know, this is maybe another episode where I would share my feelings or you would share your feelings about this. And I think it's the stupidest thing in the world, like that there's a division based on someone's skin tone. I think it's ridiculous. But the fact that something like this is now at least making people realize, like, whoa, there is this group of people in our country that literally all, for the most part, right, a majority of, feel a certain way about a certain thing. There is something wrong with that. Whether or not, you know, you believe it wholeheartedly or you don't, it doesn't matter, because ultimately there are people who feel this way and we have to deal with that.
Right.
That's the biggest challenge, I think, is people need to understand that there's a group of people in our country that feel a certain way
For a good reason.
Exactly. And that is a terrible thing. Like, I don't, it's hard. I think it's hard for me to wrap my brain around, you know, and I think a lot of people are that way, which is one of the reasons we really appreciate you coming on and starting this dialogue and starting to talk with us about it, because I think that there's so many people who have never heard stories like the ones that you shared with us today. They had no idea that things like this are occurring, and even were, exactly, still, and even were at one time. It's just crazy. It's crazy to think about that 2020 in this modern world, you know, we're still dealing with things like this.
And I credit the lack of history being told. You know, we say, you're just saying, you know, if you don't know your history, we're likely to repeat it. But I remember the years of even, you know, now, even as an educator, I was able to see so much and saying, no wonder our nation is still naive, you know. Oh yes, we can, we can, it's okay to talk about Martin Luther King. That's accepted, that's acceptable, you know, but there's a broader picture than that. He was one person, you know, but that was the permissible person to talk about, you know, and the permissible book, you know, to read was To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, that's permissible, you know, reading. However, you know, I asked someone not too long ago, you know, Martin Luther King, okay, they knew who that was. But then I say, oh, okay, but then you know Tom Robinson, knowing that that was a required reading. They couldn't identify they couldn't identify Tom Robinson. You know, you read this book, you took that assessment on it, but they didn't know. And I told them, okay, he was George Floyd. Go back and read it with comprehension.
And I think that, you know, as we're kind of coming to a close here, at least for this session, you know, I think the hardest part for me, you know, like, I'm with Levi, like, skin color has never been a thing for me. Like, it's always been, like, my mom and dad raised me that, like, listen, you respect everyone, no matter what their background, no matter what their race, no matter what, like, if that, especially like as a kid growing up, an adult, you shake that person's hand, you look them in the eye, like that was what, you know, we grew up with. My wife, same thing, like she, military family, you know, like, so it's, and so I think a challenge, I think for a lot of us growing up like that was, there's not this, for us to be like, yes, it's there, we recognize it, we want to stand with you, we want to, you know, but like, it's hard getting into that other mindset of someone else thinking differently, right? Where we're like, you know, we see that happening, and like I said, there's this anger, there's this burning, like, that's not right, you know, like sense of like passion that's coming out. But for some people, they're like, they don't think twice about it. You know, for that guy, there was something there with that guy that like, he didn't feel the same way, you know? And so I think going through that and navigating through this and having these conversations is good, because it's helping us all learn, you know, like through this. Again, I've said from the beginning, I'm like, the best way in these discussions is like, listen, you know, you're like, we just want people to listen. Okay, yeah, like we want to listen too, and but on top of that, we want to learn, and we want to grow, and then we want to unify and love our brothers and sisters, right? And so as we do that, so for those of us, like, here's the conversation that, or the last question here to kind of close out, like, as you think about the impact that this has had on our country and right here in Omaha, and we take a step back, you know, like as we have white friends and black friends, how do we begin to stand, you know, with one another, overcoming this racism that has been taking place for so long in our country? Like, what, I know we've kind of said it, like just having the conversation, right? But what does that look like? Because for me, I'm like, okay, that's great, you have the conversation, but then what? Like, my fear is that a lot of people and the media and everyone else, we're going to have these conversations, right, for the next month or so, and then something new will happen in the world and in the country or whatever, and all this stuff gets swept under the rug, and it's like, here's the new hot thing that we're covering now, and that becomes the topic of discussion, whereas I think we're all sitting here saying, no, like, this is the beginning of something new, this is going to continue to go on, we want to continue to have this dialogue and this conversation moving forward, and then reevaluate, like, where are we at, you know, with not just us and our city, but like as our country and things like that. Mm-hmm. So what's your response to that? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think in a nutshell is, you know, you mentioned the conversations, and I mentioned the conversations, but it's the history. Yeah. Because it's hard for you to comprehend the conversations that you're going to hear if you don't know the history of what had taken place. Even the history right here in Omaha, you know, we can kind of pick it up later, but I knew something had happened here in Omaha when I moved here. I'm not originally from here, so it was a person coming from the outside with different experience and military experience, and I was able to look in and see. And for over a year, almost 2 years, I kept saying, what is wrong in this town? Mm-hmm. My mom, when I moved here, you know, first thing people say, ask me from home, any black people there? You know, black people live in Omaha. Well, that's in the history book as well, and if you do the history, you'll see how we got here. Yeah. But even looking at that, I said, yeah, Mama, something is wrong. And she asked me, what do you mean? I said, it feels like, and nobody knows that Martin Luther King spoke. It feels like people are on this part of town, and it's like they're on a plantation, and they're not allowed to leave that part of town. It feels very much like it's a time in the past, and I'm living in this time warp, and I don't know what this is. I would later learn what it was when my daughter, who was stationed in Colorado at the time, she said, Mom, remember when you were saying something happened there, you can't put your hand on it? And I said, yeah. And she sent me a link with all the information. Oh,
and she's setting it up for the next podcast.
There it is. And until we know our history and the why, you have no idea what has taken place and what has transpired. We have to be looking at the history.
Wow. I'm excited. So again, thank you for being transparent and open and the ongoing conversation. And that's what I think we're all excited for. every time I talk with you, I'm like, all right, let's do this. Like, I'm excited to have another conversation because I'm learning so much. And I think, for our audience and for those of you as we move forward with this, like, there's going to be a lot of good stuff. I mean, I say good as far as a lot of learning, a lot of growth. We've said this from the beginning. I truly believe that God is going to use this evil that has taken place and use it for His good. And I think it starts with the conversation, but then it's now let's deal with the history. Let's go back, let's learn a little bit, and that's going to be on the next episode as you share with us a little bit about the history here in Omaha. Some of the crazy, again, things that went down where you're like, that actually took place in my city, and I had no clue. So again, I think a little bit of shock. This is kind of the Grace University talk that's coming, it's uncomfortable, but it's also good to learn a different perspective and to have it be the truth behind what has taken place, and then to get your feedback and opinion as far as now that we know that, what's next, So with that being said, can we pray?
Yeah.
Can we pray? And
the scripture I want to leave you with: you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You want to know how to move forward from this? You have to go look at the truth.
Yeah.
The dark and the good.
Yep. Yeah. And I just want to pray for us, obviously, but then pray for our city and our country as we continue to dialogue about this and talk about it, and hopefully move forward in love.
Yes.
And not hate and not evil, and not racism, but really take the time to learn and grow from this. So let us pray, and we'll close it out there, and then we'll obviously send off our audience, and we'll be back. We'll be back for more. So Lord, thank you so much just for this time. Lord, we thank you for Justine and her family, and Lord, thank you for her transparency. Lord, I thank you just for the opportunity that it's been to get to develop a friendship and a relationship there with her. Lord, we thank you for Levi and my brotherhood there with him as well. And Father, I just want to lift up our city to you. I want to lift up our country to you. And Lord, we just ask that you would squash the evil that has been happening and the hate that has been happening in our cities and in our country. And we just pray that this would be a time that we can come together and be unified, a time that we can learn from one another and we can continue to grow. And ultimately, Lord, we stand with each other locked in arms, just praying that you would use us to be a light for you and to shed light on this topic and to create an engagement and a conversation that is tough to have. So Lord, we just pray that ultimately you'd be glorified through these conversations, through this time, and just thank you for our brothers and sisters listening and with us and that want to stand unified with us. So thank you again for just who you are and the people you bring into our lives that allow us to go on a deeper level and learn more. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good stuff. Thanks for coming in. When are you coming back?
When am I coming back?
When are you coming back? That's the question.
We can't wait too long. It's got to be a quick follow-up.
We're going to have to get back into this soon because, like I said, there's a lot of good stuff. But maybe we'll connect in next week, possibly. So we'll jump back in next week.
Okay. You guys heard that.
Thank you guys.
More to
next
come.
week. Stay
Stick
tuned.
with us. Thanks so much.
More Justine Campbell.
Hey.
She's coming. Awesome. You did good.
Oh.
Look at that.